Yeah, so let's talk about pigment a little bit because this is something that pops up with me too. And as aforementioned, just having the red stuff in there, I think, is a contributing factor. Whether you're breeding two black nosed dogs that are red recessive together, um, I've had some dogs that I've bred together that both had really good pigment to get a litter of subpar pigment. And it would seem that if somebody wanted to truly outright correct, let's say, quote unquote, correct pigment issues, that you would go breed to a heavily colored dog. Um, like my stuff off of India or
Yeah.
Jamaica, they almost have what I'll call black skin. So underneath their fur, their baseline is black. Yes, there are some areas on their belly that are still lacking the pigment, but I would probably say if I could shave the dog bald, they're probably upwards of
Mhm.
75% pigmented all the way through their skin. And then when you continually breed either white dogs or pied dogs, um, I think that's kind of where you start to lose the pigment because the white dogs typically have
Mhm.
obviously they have a lack of color in their fur. It's not that they're technically white. What have you done to see that you can make an impact on your pigment in your program? Because this is something that's important to me. I don't think enough people take it into consideration with the health effects of pigmented dogs. And it, just um, prior to this interview, I did an interview with a guy that has colored dogs, and his program is heavily colored. But he had talked about um, the dilutes in the
Huh.
program having skin issues and fur issues, and then I looked it up, and there is a genetic I guess disease, if you will. And I off the top of my head, I can't remember. I want to say it's like blue fur disease or something weird like that. It has an official name, but where they do start losing their fur, and that's essentially because of dilute pigment or lack thereof. So, what have you done to correct it? Have you just tried to pick dogs with great pigment,
I mean,
and
we still
you
have dogs that
seemingly are
show up
getting
with,
better
not
pigment?
great pigment. Like the our last breeding with Nomad, he doesn't have the best eyeliner out there. So we bred him to Juno, a Roman daughter who had looks like she took her eyeliner and just like did around her eyes like a Sharpie. And y- the male I kept out of litter. He's got super pigment. The female is lacking on one eye. She's got a little bit on her nose. Which is interesting you talk about the color dogs because you see some programs that breed, like a lot of the like the straight standard performance breeders, they always have like lots of color patches, but sometimes you notice they're lacking nose pigment, which is interesting. Um, which I think some of our nose pigment
Mm.
issues come from not like just the red, just like when it's pink, um, came through July. So we do see some of that from time to time. Like Cannonball had red pigment, but she was also missing pigment on her nose. But also, when we have the dogs with lots of patches, like say the stuff coming down from Roman, and his sister has a good deal more like dark brindle patches on her. Like her puppies will be born and they'll like already have like black noses and stuff, and that's always cool to see. But as much as you try to breed for it, every once in a while you're gonna get one of those little pinky eyes. or yeah.
Yeah, I wish I could say it's only been a couple, but for me, but I noticed my India stuff, India being a very heavily colored dog, I'm probably going to call her Blue Fawn. Um, e- Everything that I've bred off of her and or bred back to itself, all have great pigment, but inversely, take stuff down off of Sugar, who was a Mufasa, kind of that bloodline, the red nose. And you start putting that together in combination, and you'll start to get the pink noses. Like this dog that I kept now, and part of me says, should I keep her or not? But I've got a dog named Lemon that was off my Annie breeding, and she was I one a few that was had a red nose in that litter, but
Hmm.
her red's not even strong. It's very thin. She definitely has a very pink-esque vibe to her when she gets heated up, which I don't care for, but I can tell you as far as the substance and the rest of the dog, um, I'm really into, and I'm gonna give
Yeah.
her time. The pigment's not gonna change. I mean, she might darken up a little bit. But no, I've
Yeah.
I've produced some red dogs that are really almost chocolate pigment where they're very a deep red that it's full and you know it's not dilute. Now, what I will say is I'm going to be curious to embark this dog, and I've never really paid attention to the color panels on these dogs, and maybe I should more with respect to pigment. Um, I would love to see if there's some correlation to non-dilute carriers, bred to other non-dilute carriers that will
Yeah.
create better pigment, or, maybe vice versa, keeping the red recessives away from each other or something. But yeah, I like a dog with good pigment. It's not the end all be all for me, but it is
Yeah.
sharp to have, especially if you can get you an all white dog with good pigment. The downside to the all white dogs is pet people don't want all white
Yeah,
dogs.
I have
It's
trouble
just what it
finding
is.
homes for the red nose ones.
So
Like, you get people in standard dogs or like more standard dogs, and it's trouble finding homes for those guys.
I think that's important to note. Like, so you live in North Carolina, and that southern southeastern part of the United States really has had the core of that standard side of the breed. Uh, that's kind of that area's when you think
Yeah,
of an American Bulldog, that's what most people have. They've always
honestly,
been
most of
that
my dogs
farm
don't even
utility
stay
dog.
down here. It's they go. I'm lucky if I have local homes. Just to say that they're always
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I guess where I was going was that I think that the liver pigment and that is really truly a standard side of the breed that takes it at a really high priority. So maybe that's part of that. Now, seeing that you have people buying from and like myself, I mean, not everybody's local. A lot of people come from bordering states or even further. But for me, if I had a fully standard program, I think regardless of how nice it was, I would struggle to sell dogs based on my geographical location. Um, I just think that people that come to me gravitate towards more of a bully type phenotype, but the people that come to me are also
Yeah.
not the people that subscribe to the extreme side of the standard, which I'm neighbored by quite a few breeders that are what I'll call I hate to put labels on people, but I mean the only way to distinguish it I would say was maybe a little bit more extreme, where the dogs definitely have a lot more mass, a lot more type, but also aren't necessarily built for performance, which is to each their own. And I don't care about anybody else's program but myself. Um, with that being said, and just kind of touching on that, uh, when I go back and I look at like some of the magazines, and I'm not sure if you've
Mhm.
frequented like the American Bulldog Reviews or some of the old National Bulldogger magazines, when you look at the difference between the types, I feel like there was a lot less disparity between what a standard and a bully dog was back then. And with the division in the type, do you think that it's led to more people breeding to the extremes where you got some people on the standard side that are real, like, kind of pedigree snobs that are
Yeah.
like, "Oh, your dog's not a true standard because it's got XYZ bully dog back 6 generations," or inversely, on the bully side, you've got these guys that are just 100% breeding for type, and they would claim that some of the bully hybrid, standard hybrid dogs don't own up to have enough type because the breed isn't recognizable with type. That's their stance on it. What's your thoughts on how it's with that division of the standards? How have you seen it evolve over the last, let's say, 20
I mean,
years?
you've definitely seen. I think you see it more on the bully side because I think a lot of you don't see a whole lot of like the real 100% performance standard people. They don't go out places. Like someone might come out with some of their dogs every once in a while, but you just don't see them that often. Um, and some of them have done a good job of keeping like the phenotype. Some of them have gone too narrow, and it's just they've lost a lot of type, it looks like. And on the bully side, I mean, we've gone from the 100% Johnson dogs, which back in the day they look good in pictures, and then you run across some of them in person, and it's not so. But then you've got like this totally different like thing, this those big old round-headed bully dogs now with like the pinched in eyes and like the pinched in noses and stuff. So it's there's I mean there's a lot of different types of kind of just shown up over the past, dozen years or decades.
Do you feel like if we were to work ourselves back to just trying to create one type that the general
Probably
health of
on
the
the
dogs
bully
would get
side,
better?
some of it.
Well, I would argue that on the standard side, I would argue
This,
that there's quite a few breeders that have actually tried to, like, add more substance to the standard dogs, which are kinda leading that in a different direction as well, where, when you think about the performance standard dogs and dogs that should be out hitting hogs in the woods and being able to do that for a few hours or more, um, that all the extra
mhm.
mass wouldn't necessarily lend well to that function, um, and I kinda get caught in this quandary all the time, and I have a follow-up question, but I would argue that I see a lot of the standard dogs are starting to get a little bit more
Yeah.
towards the middle and bully up, maybe not bully up, but substance up. And it seems to be going over well as far as the general public's concerned. But I think that's where you kind of get you know the the standard uh,
Well, I mean, I'll
elitists
tell you
or
like
whatever you want
those.
to call them,
Yeah, the performance guys, the 100% guys. I
purists.
mean, they're out there. I mean, they show up on Facebook every once in a while, but you just don't see the dogs unless somebody's like bought a puppy from them and comes out every once in a while.
Hmm. Yeah. So with kind of taking into consideration, and you're a judge in the NKC, and you've seen quite a few dogs over the years, and I've asked this of people that show because, if we talk about the American Bulldog and it was kind of created based on a function, and a lot of these dogs initially were put together based on the ability to do some level of work at the time, and they had to excel in that level of work, whether it was hogs or man work or whatever it was, um, general utility. And that was the reasoning for putting different dogs together, was based on their function. And then we step into the show ring of 2023 and we look at the disparity in the types. Um, but it seems to me that we've lost, I guess in some respects, we've seen, not that we can test every dog as far as temperament and workability, but as far as the general appearance to do a job. I mean, when we talk about some of the heavier bully dogs, which I have, um, and then we talk about some of the heavier standard dogs, um, and they start to maybe lean a little bit away from that performance stuff. Should there be more priority to, you know,
Oh,
to the at least the
yeah,
appearance
definitely.
of
I
being
mean,
able to function for that
if
job?
I know as a judge, it's not in our standard, but if you go into the bully ring and there's a dog that can't breathe after walking around the ring once, like I can't in good conscience use that dog. I mean, you have to be able to breathe. I mean, that doesn't seem like you're asking too much to have dogs that can cleanly breathe. If they're about to pass out, and it's 75 degrees in the shade, that's an issue.
Yeah, 100%. And I know we're all trying to get the numbers back up for showing, and that's a whole different conversation, and why that hasn't come around or come back into favor. But, it's sometimes I weigh in the factor of, like, type over function, you know what I mean? Like, it's really cool to have those typey dogs, and I think everyone can agree upon, if you saw it sitting or if you saw it in a picture and you're like, "Oh, that's a really cool typey dog. That is a cool looking dog." But then the next video was that dog doing 5 minutes worth of anything, and its tongue's hanging off to the side of its head, and it's like,
Yeah.
it's not a clean breathing dog. You don't have to hear it, to understand that. But at what point are we working ourselves into a corner by, like, over exaggerating a type versus, like, kind of keeping in mind the function of the dog? And I think, everybody's going to have their own priority in their program. And I don't think anybody can
Oh I think I don't think
it's
there's
to
an
each
either
their
or, and
own,
I
I
think a lot
guess,
of
way that has to be.
well, I can't have a typey dog and have it be functional. It's like you can have both. Or like working people. I don't care if he's ugly as long as he works, or I don't care what color it is. I'm like, you can have an in standard dog and do both. It doesn't. You don't have to, sacrifice one for the other. You might have to work a little harder to get to that goal, but you can have a nice. I mean, I got nice typey heads around here, and a little heavier, dogs. I mean, Bacchus is probably not going to go, I could probably suffer trialing like in the middle of summer because he does carry a lot of muscle. But, I got plenty of dogs who, he can go out and run and do whatever, but, you just don't have to, sacrifice one for the other.
Yeah, that's yeah, you're true. That's correct because I mean, unfortunately, I have one side of my breeding program that is literally based around one of my most favorite dogs I've ever owned, and she wasn't conformationally the greatest dog, and her temperament was exceptional, and her intelligence was exceptional, and she's got a lot of good things that come with that bloodline, but you know, some would argue that these dogs for a quote unquote bully dog lack type. And I think what
Yeah.
they really truly mean is they lack substance. Um, but, I could take that dog on a 12-mile AD and
Hmm.
probably afterwards go and run it with my quad. And I'd get done and want to
Yeah.
drink a beer and it would be bouncing around asking for what's next. So you kind of have to weigh into now, the goal for me, and I know that it's not going to be easy, but the goal for me is to try to clean up some of the stuff structurally that, which is always a quandary for me too, because I have a high performing dog that maybe is a little easty westy in the front. Okay. Like what holds priority, straight feed or a dog that can run all day? So that's where I kind of always take into account, like, I question sometimes the show standard for structure based on the performance that I've seen out of some dogs. Some dogs
No,
I've
no,
seen
yeah.
that are high performing dogs aren't structurally the greatest, and I've had some straight stifled dogs like Kingston that in theory the dog should be crippled, but he was the hardest jumping, craziest dog I've ever had and never blew out a knee, never had an issue with his hips, and is still to this day very active. And and then I see a dog like I had that what I would
Yeah.
claim had almost perfect angulation blow out her knee at 3 years old doing a flirt pole.
Yeah.
So it's like,
I mean,
okay,
my
well,
dog's all, and I don't have, a bunch of knee problems.
yeah, and it's weird because I think what we think may be more visually appealing when you talk about show structure maybe always doesn't lend itself the best to actual function. And I don't know that there's been enough people really talking about it or looking at, like, if a dog's got a lot of overangulation, technically
Yeah.
you're putting more strain on the knee than you are the hip. A dog that's more straight stifled, you would think that the impact's going to happen a little bit more at the hip than the knee. But like I said, I've watched straight stifled dogs just bounce all freaking
Yeah.
day and just never have any issues. It's the most bizarre thing ever. And then, you shoot for this gold standard of structure and you get it, and then the dog has
Exactly.
issues, and you're like, well,
I mean,
son of a
that's why
bitch.
like some people wouldn't use my Roman
You
dog because I'm
son
like,
of a
well, he
bitch.
just doesn't look athletic. I'm like, are you kidding me? This is the most powerful, explosively athletic dog I have ever had. I mean, it's ridiculous. They're like, well, he's because he has
Yeah.
substance, and he is a little straight in the rear, but I mean, he's explosive, and he comes with such power. But people are like, well, he just doesn't look like it. And I'm like, alrighty then.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, again, I think people just get hung up on a certain type or a look, and then they just wanna make excuses for the rest of it, why they wanna talk themselves out of either using a dog or entertaining using the dog. Um, let's, so I'm trying to think of a way to phrase this. So, when you're looking at, like, using a guest stud at this point in your career, what is it that takes precedence in using that dog? Is it pedigree? Is it consistency of offspring? Does working trump everything? You know, if the dog shoots in 3 but has no puppies on the ground and is scatterbred, is that a dog worth looking at? Or do these other 2 factors come into play a little bit more heavily
You
now that
know,
you've been a little more seasoned?
they would all come into play to to a point. I mean, the American Bulldog is, and at least in the southeast, you're still going to find like incredible dogs like sitting on a chain in somebody's backyard, which I've bred to twice. Well, more than twice, I think. Let me see. There's Fatback, July, and Judge. And so, but they were all, Fatback. Obviously, I was just starting out. Um, July, you could look back in his pedigree and it's just insane stuff. And the same thing with, Judge. He was out of half of my stuff and then, bred to the bottom half going back to the same kind of stuff. So there's that. You can find decent dogs that maybe they haven't had their hips done, they haven't, done to a show, they haven't been titled, but that doesn't discount them as being possible, good additions to a breeding program. But at the same time, I look at dogs. I mean, I probably wouldn't look at anything that was ridiculously scatterbred with like nothing I knew in it pedigree wise, even if it had, a Schützen 3. Um, I mean, I would look at title dogs and, if it phenotypically, was looked like my dogs, had the same type of look, had the same type of balance, and the temperament and stuff. And even maybe if there's not any commonality in the pedigree, that would be something I would be interested in breeding too. Um, I mean, I bred Cannonball to Freddie. And like, if you look at Freddie's pedigree, he had like it was a super working pedigree and there were some beautiful dogs back there. I mean, he wasn't much to look at. He was a really, really nice working dog. And Cannonball herself also had her issues, structure wise, just in the rear being a little bit hockey and, the red nose, etc. But, I've got some stuff off of her daughter right now. And I freaking love the front end of that dog, but the rear end like looks just like Cannonball and Freddy. And it's just like, well, that fucking sucks. So it's just, it's a whole bunch of different factors. And, I there's not a whole lot of people in the states right now doing a whole lot sport wise with the Bulldogs, and I don't even it's not even top of my list sometimes when I'm looking for a stud dog. You just want an overall good dog that has the drive and intelligence to go do things, but also the nice structure to go with it.
Yeah, were you a proponent of thinking that, like, one dog could fix another dog? Because I think in my experience, it's like, well, okay, just like you said, you bred Cannonball, she didn't have the greatest rear end, but you know that it's coming again, even if you did get to a litter off of her and you had better rear ends, but you know that eventually you're gonna have some pups that are gonna pop back a generation and maybe have that rear end. So are you kind of a proponent to are you trying to pick, like, 2 dogs with good structure overall to try to eliminate kinda having to jump this hurdle down the line of coming back to the same problems and having to weed through it? Is that
Yeah.
more of your strategy now than it was, I think in the beginning, people are
Yeah.
like, "Well, I could fix this with this dog and fix that with that one." Yeah, yeah, you can,
Yeah.
but you're only gonna get a small percentage of those dogs that are fixed,
Yeah. And it's
and you
interesting
gotta
because
pick
the first
correctly every time.
bred Cannonball to Padre and kept Sybil and Nomad, and they're straight, they're beautiful big dogs. But I guess it was just that bringing the other stuff in that wasn't quite as dialed in structure wise, kind of threw it for a loop. So it's like, do I want to breed it back in and potentially have it pop up more, or just kind of scrap that side? I guess I'll let him grow up and see what he does. But it's a little bit of a disappointment. But no, I don't think you can just breed one
Okay.
dog into your stuff and fix everything. I mean, it's kind of organic
Yeah.
evolution.
Yeah, I think that's yes, and stuff skips generations. So, I mean, it's like as much as I always try to tell people you got to look back at least 3 generations. And if you're happy with what you see top to bottom, that's going to be your level of success. If you only like 50% of the dogs behind the dog you're going to use, then
Yeah.
you're already limiting yourself fit by 50% at the very least. So, yeah, it's important. Um, there was something you said there I was gonna ask you about, but, I know you've been a long time proponent of hip testing. and I've covered this quite a bit on other podcasts, and I don't wanna get too far down into the weeds with it, but, um, you've tested all your
Yes.
stuff for quite a while now, correct? And you've primarily used
Which is,
OFA
I
over
use
pen
pin
hip.
hips. Basically, I switched because I test a lot of dogs, and
Mhm.
pin
Yeah,
hip is ridiculously overpriced. I think. I mean, you're looking at around here, even it's 800 some odd for pin hip,
that's
and
weird.
that's not.
Yeah,
It's not an open database. It's not even including elbows. Whereas I can go to our vet who's been doing hips and elbows for a while, and she's really good at it, and you're looking at hips, elbows, fees to send off for like $300.
yeah, it's weird because the vet that I go to that does the OFA and does the pen hip, it's like only $50 more for me to send both out. They doesn't charge you anything more. I mean, it's like basically you're sedating the dog and get it in here and do whatever. I mean, it's 5
Yeah.
more minutes for them. Now, I guess my point is, and where I was heading with this is I more recently had a conversation with somebody that thought, in their opinion, that pen hip was less accurate because it really has more variables when it comes to the vet and how much they'll distract the dog. And and
Hmm.
and I have had this experience when I tested Annie and we decided to do both for the marginal extra money. He told me he really struggled to get her to show any significance in her hips, and his
Uh-huh.
concern was he's like, "I really had to get after her because if I would try to send him in to the normal" I don't know how to say this, but, like, the normal strength that he would normally use to try to push those hips out of the sockets, he said, "If I would have done what I normally do and we would have tried to send him in to pen hip," he's like, "they would have rejected him thinking that I
Yeah.
didn't do enough." So and I thought that was interesting at the time because I was like, oh, wow, that really does mean that you have some input on how good or bad this, measurement can look.
Yeah.
And with hip conformation and OFA, I mean, it's glaringly obvious, typically when you have a bad hip, you can see the conformation isn't as great. And then, now you've get this world of people arguing, well, is it hip conformation or is it the looseness of the hips? Can you have a poor conformation and tight hips and never have an issue? Um, do you feel like you've made an impact on your breeding program, or do you think you're doing testing for your own morality within your program, but you don't really know if it's impacting it long term?
I mean, it's hard to say whether you just had good genetics for hips, and just continue them on, because it's not like we've had a lot of hips fail. I mean, I
Mm,
can only here I've only had the two, and then with OFA also you can fuck up the positioning and cheat on the positioning, and sway it one way or the other hip wise. If you can do them without sedation, sometimes you can make it look better, and sometimes it looks worse than it would with if you had sedated them. That's what we struggled with Harper, because we tried to do it without sedation twice, and it just wasn't great X-ray, so we got the mild. So they're like, well, let's sedate him and see what we get. And I thought the X-ray looked like ton better, but I think at that point OFA is like, we're not going to pass it now. We've already failed it twice, that kind
hmm.
of thing. So I mean, I think there's a downside to either one of them, but for my own personal, you know, uh, integrity and breeding, I'm going to make sure the hips and elbows are good before I breed the dog. And I've got everybody's hip X-ray going back for at least a dozen years, so that's always
Yeah,
interesting to look at. And I think they've gotten better, because looking back in the past on dogs that got good, they don't look as good as they do now.
mm,
So I don't know if
interesting.
they've gotten more stringent in I know it's just their opinion, but maybe their opinions have gotten a little more stringent on what they will allow through. And it's also
Yeah,
interesting because it's not unusual for Richard to take a German Shepherd and me to take a Bulldog. At least it wasn't back in the day, and to get those back and see, like the Bulldog would get good, but you look at the German Shepherd hips, it got fair, and you're like, well, those look better than the Bulldog hips, and you know, 'cause maybe they're taking the breed into consideration or something.
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
that's interesting. I have heard more recently that, and I don't know if this is true or not, but that OFA has gotten a lot more. I don't know if it's strict, with their w with their ratings, um, and I do wonder if maybe they take the breed into account. I mean, obviously, if you're looking at a Frenchie's hips versus an American Bulldog versus any type of herder, you're probably gonna see an extreme difference just based on the size of the dog and the way that they're constructed. I mean, a Bulldog is definitely not constructed the same way as a Shepherd by any means. Um, and they move differently and have different weight factors.
Yep.
Um, Speaking about size, your program is similar to mine. I probably would say maybe some of your dogs are a little bit bigger. And I just out of from a working standpoint, what's your ideal size male that you like to handle when you're out in the field? Does that take into account? Is there a threshold that maybe you don't want to go beyond for your own personal well-being, or that you see that it negates the workability or the movement of a dog, um, in either direction, too big, too small?
I like my males 90-ish pounds, 90, 95. Um, Roland was a big dog. He was 105 pounds in shape, and he was kind of like the exceptions to the rule. And so was Sully. Sully was over 100 pounds, and they were both still very athletic, clean breathing, agile. But for the most part, these days, I see that my males top out like 95 pounds, and that's a good size. You're not just so freaking big. And I've taken account of the wear and tear on my poor husband sometimes. But yeah, that size is good. There, I can still snatch him up if I need to. It's getting to the point sometimes is harder now. Just when you're starting out protection and stuff like that with the young males, and they're huge and they're on a harness. We go to the back tie a little more often than we used to, just because I'm not getting any younger. But but once we get to the point where we actually have control and then we move away from it, it's okay. Like right now, Spike is going through dumbbells, and we've been struggling with this for about 3 months, so he hasn't been doing protection. But protection with him is a very physical back tie activity, because he is a very strong dog, and he has very specific ideas of how he thinks things shall go, and it's not always in the direction that we think they should go in. So it's a bit of a struggle. But yeah, I don't like to wrestle anything much bigger than that. And female wise, you know, as I said, we usually get 65, 75 pound females, which is also a super good size for, just if you have to manhandle a dog when you're working them. Like
Yeah.
little Stacy was probably 55 pounds, and that was a good size for Annabelle to handle. But she's learning to struggle with her own giant male at the moment with Tater.
Yeah, I there's been over the years, there's been a handful of calls where people are like, "Oh, I'm looking for a 120-pound male," and I'm just like, "Bud, I don't know
Yeah.
I don't know what you got going on in your life that you wanna manage a 120-pound dog, but I know when it comes down to couch real estate and a lot of other things, with regards to having these dogs, that 120 pounds is what comes to mind. I think Prophet, and in probably his prime, lived in that mid-80s, and I
Hmm.
can tell you that if he wants to get busy about something and I gotta step in, it's not fun at 85 pounds, let
No,
alone
it's not.
add another 40 on there. Um, yeah, that's plenty of dog for me. Now, my stuff off my India stuff doesn't really come with a lot of weight. Even the males, albeit they in the pictures, they look very, they're very lean and shredded. They have thin skin, and that shows off the muscle definition. But as far as the density of the muscle, it doesn't go very far. So I can't even, there's no trophy to be hung on on the weight of my dogs by any means. Um, and I always find it curious because there's a lot of people that they use some for some reason weight has become a metric to the size of a dog. I have a 24-inch dog in my house now that's probably 75 pounds, and he's just as tall as another dog that's 100 plus
Yeah.
pounds. It's not a he's a big, tall dog, he's just not a heavy dog, and he's kept lean. So there's that. There was something else I was gonna ask about the size. So have you ever taken into account within your breeding program not losing size? Has that ever been something that's kind of registered at your forefront? Have you ever had to give it consideration?
Not particularly. I mean, we don't see the 100 pounders anymore,
Mm,
which I'm not depressed about. As long
yeah.
as we stay in our 90ish range for the males, I'm good with that. Occasionally we'll get like a smaller female. Um, they're not the norm, so we're not too concerned with that. Um, yeah, size has never really been a something we've had to fix so far. But I think
Do
it's
you
because
do you I was gonna say, do you pick your puppies? Is there any size consideration that goes into when you pick a dog?
yeah, well, I mean they're all fat and and big. But I mean, yeah. Though, as I said, I often pick my puppies when they're like, 2 weeks old, just because I like that puppy.
Is it
But
based on markings or what
it
is
just
what is the criteria at 3 weeks that you can find to be a
like, but
gunslinger future prospect?
yeah, it's like the head and the body type, and when you get to 4 weeks and they finally starting to get personality, and then sometimes after that, it's like you're sitting there like you're just a really cool puppy, which is how I ended up with
Mm.
Mike. So I don't do any of those puppy puzzle things or what have you.
Yeah. Have you ever had any value? Do you ever see any value in, like, if you were to keep a couple or 2 or 3 and watch them grow? Do you find that there's value there, or do you think it's just better just kinda use that 8-week window and run with it?
I mean, the hard thing about the bulldogs is if you, I mean, I'll often keep two from a litter, like either two sisters or a brother and a sister or something. But you watch them grow up, obviously, and some turn out and some don't. But the problem with the bulldogs is you're like, it's hard as hell to place or sell an older bulldog puppy. I mean, with the German Shepherds, they just increase in value the older they get. And the Bulldogs, you're like, we take this puppy, I'll pay you $20, once they get to a couple of months old. And then, yeah. So, yeah, most of the time,
Why do you think that is? What is the
it's
reasoning behind a shepherd being worth more as it ages?
it's just the market for them.
Mm,
I'm not exactly sure what it is about them. I just think, people with the Shepherds are thinking, they don't want to mess with the puppy, and maybe they're training or something like that, and they don't want the crapshoot of a puppy. So when you get to a certain age, you know what they are.
yeah.
It's just a
Which you
whole different mindset and market.
Yeah, I think there's a real struggle with getting even trying to rehome an adult
Oh
or,
yeah,
or a later staged puppy. Um, yeah, that is a
and
that's a
from my
that's a
yeah.
formula I haven't figured out yet.
Yeah, the Bulldogs, which Richard and I have talked to it at length, because the German Shepherd, their purpose and their jobs, back in the day at least, especially, and today even in law enforcement and like in sport and stuff, they're supposed to change handlers. It's not supposed to be that hard. It might take a little while, but then after a while, you're like, you're my handler now. Like an older bulldog, adult bulldog, especially a strong, personality one, they don't change handlers. Like you can rehome them. Like I've gotten older bulldogs, like Alex. He was 7 or 8 or so when we got him. But you can tell him what to do until a point, and like he's gonna be like, "No, you're not the absolute boss of me, and we're gonna have an issue with that if you continue to push it." So they don't change handlers and quite as easily, if ever completely, once they've really bonded with you. It seems like.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective. You're right. I mean, this breed is very social, and it's very social within their own family. I mean, I don't want to say that this dog is, our breed is one that you just feel like every dog's gonna be good in every scenario. But I will say that as far as you know, the structure of your house, man, they couldn't be any more of, like, up your ass at times, you
Yeah,
know, to literally just suck. Now, they'll always typically gravitate towards one person more than another, I find, but, you know, as far as, like, just that general undying love for their family, it's definitely not to be matched with many other breeds. Um, we've covered quite a bit. I'm trying to think if every time I stop one of these things, I'm like, "Oh, man, I wanted to ask about this," and I never
uh,
get to take I mean, it's hard when you're doing it real time to, like,
yeah,
"Okay, what really did I wanna ask about?" So let's talk about, there's a couple follow-up questions, and we're approaching 3 hours, and I appreciate your time, so I wanna get you out of here. But, I always find that we could probably talk for 10 hours and not cover
yeah,
everything. Um but let's talk about, and I'm gonna put you on the spot. Let's talk about some other programs that you think are doing it well. Um, maybe not dogs that you particularly would use or have interest into crossing over to your program necessarily, but let's find out. You know, for me, and I'm just talking about for me. When I came across your program, you've kind of like shot to the top as what I'll call the gold standard for breeding, whether that was our breed or any other breed. There's really not much more that you can do in your program to to be any better, let's say. And maybe by your own metrics there's things you want to change, but I mean, you guys work your dogs daily, you get to do it for a living, you're testing your dogs more than almost anybody has, you know, a normal person has time for. um, and you've been blessed in that way, and then you're coupling all of that with your health testing, you're also doing the confirmation showing. So for me, you're a program that I aspire to do. And I can never be what Gunslinger is because I have a full-time job and I've got,
yeah.
you know, other stuff going on that I can't make dogs my life right now. And probably by the time I can, I'll probably be too old to want to give a shit about it, to be honest with you, um, physically. But um, who do you look at that's around now that maybe has been around longer than you, maybe even somebody that's just started up more recently? Who can you say that you look at their program like, oh, okay, that they're doing it right? Like, let's give a call out to a shout out, if you will, to some people that you think are actually getting their shit together.
Yeah, I mean there are still a lot of good programs out there. I mean, some of them don't go to shows anymore, so you miss seeing all their nice dogs, like Bully Rascals in Canada. You don't see her showing anymore, but she always has like beautiful, bully type dogs. And see Outcast Kennels, Amy Meyer does a really good job. Um okay, obviously you are up there also with your dogs. In Europe, you have a good number of kennels doing some good work in Europe, like uh, the the Gase's kennel, the Chestnut,
Mm,
um, and Stephanie in Canada, who's doing a good job with her dogs. I mean, there's still plenty of we've lost a lot of the breeders over the years, so which is really
100%.
impacting the show scene right now. I mean, there used to be like, so many kennel rates would come in and show dogs and what have you, and then for whatever, personal reasons or just life changes, and you just get out of dogs. So many have left, and like the void hasn't been filled, but we still have those good breeders out there, even if they aren't coming to the shows, which for whatever reason just people lose interest. And I know the competition isn't what it used to be. But yeah, I mean, there are still a number of good breeders out there that are doing good work and putting out some really nice dogs.
Yeah, I think there are still a number of breeders putting out nice dogs, but I don't know that I would say there's a good amount. I think
Yeah,
that the total body of
very
work
true.
in the
But the
breeding
percentage is
community, yeah.
not.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
much lower because I know when I'm out
yeah,
hunting for stud dogs, I mean, like you said almost before, I was gonna mention that when you were saying, you know, there's still some really nice dogs out on chains that nobody's ever seen and this and that, and I kinda pride myself in trying to turn over some rocks from people that I know, you know, have been into dogs, maybe don't do showing, don't do this, don't really, you know, advertise their dogs, but I know that there's something that they got sitting in one of their barn, in their couch somewhere
yeah,
that is an untested, beautiful animal. And there's part of me says, oh, there's some excitement in trying to find that next great dog that nobody else found. And you're really taking a chance on using it, but there are some of those people out there. Um, and then there's still people like, Alan and Don that are breeding, that I think a lot of people, um, maybe don't even know. You know what I mean? I mean, we know them because we're in that community, but there's people out there with Confederate and Allen's dogs. Um, what's his owl hollow? I can
Owl
never
Hollow,
say
yeah.
that. Yeah, I can never say that properly. Um, but that still have dogs, and I think the direction of their programs have changed slightly. Maybe I don't know their earlier work as well, but those guys are still out there putting out dogs and a wealth of knowledge that can be tapped into. Um, kind of piggybacking off of that question, um, you mentioned some other breeders, and uh, the one thing that stands out to me, and I was thinking about this the other night. I was sitting on the couch, and when I look at notable programs right now and probably the last 10 years, maybe even a little longer than that, um, I noticed that they're really, um, a lot of the kennels that I'm interested in are women owned kennels.
Mm,
Um, and there's been a big push, maybe not a push, but like a big change when you used to think about, dog breeders of maybe like the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It was always dog men, and I know
yeah,
that, and I know that there's some social aspects of this that have allowed women to, there's been some evolution in the freedom of women and the roles that they play within their families and
yeah,
professionalism and all that goes into account. But if we're all on even playing ground now, men and women, as far as what we can do for a living or the opportunities that we have to do for hobbies on the side, um, it seems that the women are doing it really well, and they are really kind of the forefront of our breed right now. When I think about a lot of the other kennels, what do you think's the contributing factor to women being into the breed and then being really good at doing
yeah.
it?
It's hard to say like why we all ended up up here. I mean, they're big, masculine, like impressive, like dogs. I mean, I can see why we are good breeders. I mean, a lot of the German Shepherd programs are and stuff are it's women also, and I don't want to say it's like I mean, you're kind of the exception of the male breeder, sort of, because you're like really involved in like the whelping and the puppies and the taking care of them and stuff like that. You see like the older generation, it's not quite like that. And I think there's something to be said for having that that hands on, really being like involved with it. I'm so like nurturing, but um you really take more pride, I guess, in it when you're like there and you care enough to actually be there when the puppies are born and make sure they're okay and the females are okay and take care of everybody. And I guess that's a traditionally, I'll say like female orientation kind of
Hey, I got
behaviors.
tits too.
But yeah, but yeah, I don't know why we're all drawn to the breed. It's kind of that's an interesting question that I never really thought about. Because you don't think you don't see these big giant muscular breeds and just think, hey, I bet chicks dig those. Yeah.
Yes, and it's a curious juxtaposition because I mean, you know even a lot of other notable kennels have always been like, a husband and wife that both parties
Yeah.
were kind of equally involved. Um, and and that kind of balanced it out. But like as we move forward now, it's like, man, there's just more women. Like there's just it really is. And they're doing it well. It's not like, and I don't know that, gender plays into a role of when it comes to breeding. It's not, there's no physical success being a man versus a woman in the breed. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously there's some constraints, but I mean, as far as making good solid decisions, putting good dogs together, one person, Stephanie, had mentioned when I asked her this question that she felt like women were a little bit more willing to put in the hard work, maybe, travel a little farther or make sacrifices a little more than maybe a man is in their program. I don't know if I can attest to that because I think it's more based on work ethic, but you know, there's a couple other people out there on the men's side of of breeding these dogs that I think are still doing it well. Um, Chris Smith comes to mind. He's got a
Oh
really
yeah.
strong program. And I met Chris initially. He was 100% bully guy, and then he started struggling with dogs, with their breathing and stuff, and wanted to correct that and introduce some standard blood to his stuff. And now he's kind of start pushing it back towards the middle, again, and I
Hmm.
think he's really doing well with that. Um, uh, yeah, so I think, but I still think there's more women than men, and it's interesting. Let's finish on this one. What's it going to take for us to get show numbers up? I mean, I know we're all busy, and part of this podcast is try to revitalize the enthusiasm around the breed. I know it's real easy to cut everybody down and cut everybody's programs
Yeah.
down, and I know we all still deal with a lot of inner squabbling or gossip when it comes to after a dog show or whatever, but all things aside, there used to be a time and a place where you could count on 100 dogs or more, and it wasn't from two of us bringing 10 dogs each.
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
and part of my thing is I feel guilty because I usually do show up with quite a bit of dogs, as many as I can handle safely, which usually accounts to anywhere from 4 to 10 dogs, depending on age and size. And I feel guilty when I can't make a show. Obviously, went through a divorce, and that period of my life was, I didn't have the help to leave the property.
Yeah.
And when you're committed to the dogs, and obviously, then other things come into play with family and kids and sporting events and other stuff takes you away from being able to compete with your dogs. But what do you think would help to get people out more? What's the message that we need to start preaching to get people? I mean, I know people are like, "Oh, you got to get out there and prove your dogs if you want to have a good breeding program," and that is true. But I think when you put that pressure on somebody, maybe it makes them feel a little bit discouraged, if you will. I
Yeah.
mean,
I don't know. I think just support the new show hosts and stuff,
yeah,
and the old show hosts. It seems like you have a core group of people who put on the shows, and then attendance falls off. So you get maybe have one or two new ones pop up, and then they'll have good attendance once, and the next time it's just crap. It's hard to say. I mean, the first fall, was with the hog dog stuff, and then like the economy, and just it's revived for a while, and then it's gone again. Like this last year was just abysmal attendance. Um,
yeah.
but yeah.
Well, it's funny when I looked back at when I've been recently, I had acquired a ton of the American Bulldog reviews, and some nights I just sit down and instead of staring at the fucking TV, I'll just thumb through the pages and read all the little nonsense. And don't fool yourself. The arguing and the bickering was always there, and that's never
Yeah.
died. But what I did notice, a little bit more was that there was a lot more breed clubs, and that financially the stress of throwing a show was carried amongst many, not just amongst few, and
Hmm.
that maybe led to having a few more opportunities for shows. I don't know really if that has changed the attendance or not, but what I did like to see was that I was thinking to myself, oh, like, well, if I had a breed club and there was 10 of us, then split the cost 10 way, each person gives $500 to throw a show. That's better than a $5,000 show ticket. Um, t-
Yeah.
you know, and then all you're trying to do is recoup your expense of having the show. But and if you don't have a field or a venue that you can host it for yourself, then you
Yeah,
have to
that's a
take
huge
that into
expense. I
account.
mean,
But yeah.
we've the it's been more than a couple of years, but back in the day you had to have insurance for the show, which was expensive. But then probably 8, 9 years ago, NKC was like, well, we just cover y'all underneath our umbrella of insurance. So you lost that big chunk of change that were having to put out. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's just fallen to a couple of us to host shows, and the Nationals usually has a pretty good turnout. This past year wasn't as good, but I think honestly, people just need to people who are interested in showing need to show up with nicer caliber dogs. Sometimes they're buying from old. I mean, it sucks to say that, but like you go to nationals and you're like looking around, you're like, what in the world? That looks like a black mouth cur. That looks like a leggy pit bred pit bull. and then those people get discouraged when they don't win. It's like, do you know what your dog is supposed to look like? I mean, that's not like the positive, like we need to build shows up, but
Yeah.
it does help.
Yeah. Well, and
But people just it's
there
like
was
people just don't put in the work. It's
yeah. Yeah. I definitely there's 2 things that come to mind and, I think it happened at the last show that you had. I had that big dog Pope that I drug off a couch and we were standing he was doing really well that day and, there was a guy there that had a red-nosed bully dog, and we were standing underneath the tent. We were waiting to go into the next ring or something. He's like, "Oh, one of these days, Justin, I'm gonna beat you in the ring." And I was like, "Oh," I said, "You know how you could do that?" And he's like, "How?" I was like, "Buy a dog from me, compete with my own stuff." You know what I mean?
Mhm.
But it's a goofy little statement, but it really is kind of I if you wanna get into having the best, you gotta go to the best. Like,
Yeah,
don't think that you're better than somebody else when you don't have the 20 years of experience and think you're gonna all of a sudden reinvent the wheel because they haven't been trying to do it the right way. I think there's something to be said, like, if you wanna get into showing, you wanna get into breeding, find the best. Like, start with the
yeah,
best. At least the even if you got the worst of the best, like, you're exponentially ahead of everybody else that's just trying to start something from the ground up.
yeah,
And it took some time for even myself to kinda subside to that methodology, and get out of way of my own ego, to say, "Okay, well, I've gotten so far that I could get with my own stuff. Where am I going next, and how am I gonna do
yeah,
this?" And, then you go down that rabbit hole of really looking at dogs and seeing who's producing what and why, and consistently. Um, and that's a message that anybody should take heed in and just and bypass the bullshit and get to the best of the best right off the rip. Um, well, I think we'll end it on that. I don't have anything else that truly comes to mind that we haven't touched on. I think we've covered quite a bit with regards to your kennel. Um, I'm always excited to see what's coming next for you guys. You know, it's it'll be interesting to watch you go off yard. I think that'll
yeah.
that
It's going to be
I'm sure
quite the
there's not
journey.
I'm probably not the only person paying attention to
Eh.
that. So, uh,
And let me know if you
and with
need
that
any more, pictures or what have
yeah,
you.
I will, I've got quite a bit I've went down the road, and then when I do come to that point, I will. So I appreciate your time, Maggie. Where can everyone find you as far as website, social media? How do they get a hold of you?
We have gunslingerkennels.com. That's our website. And we are also on Facebook, Gunslinger American Bulldog, Gunslinger Kennels. And that's usually where I post the most updated information about, upcoming events and breedings and things like that.
Perfect. Um, Yep. Well, all the success to you in your future endeavors. Hopefully, these all go as planned, and may the bull gods ever be in our favor because
Exactly.
I feel like we're always up against the cross every time we try to do something.